The moment the news broke, it felt almost unreal. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the couple who have captivated the world with their love story, controversies, and unflinching defiance of tradition, were denied entry for a second visit to Australia. Think about that for a moment. A nation known for its warm welcomes, for celebrating royal occasions with pomp and ceremony, had just slammed the door on one of the most famous couples on the planet. How often does a modern monarchy face outright rejection? Rarely. And yet here we were. This wasn't just a diplomatic slight. It was a public spectacle, a cultural shockwave, and for the couple themselves, a deeply personal affront. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. But why did this happen now? Why Australia? And why, after the success, or the perceived success, of their first visit, would officials suddenly change course? Was it politics, public sentiment, or something far more personal simmering beneath the surface? These are questions we need to explore, because the answer is far more complicated than any headline could capture. And trust me, the story behind this rejection is filled with twists, tensions, and revelations that almost no one outside of the inner circles of power knows about. Before we dive into the specifics of the rejection and their plans for a comeback, it's crucial to understand the context. Harry and Meghan are not just any public figures. They are members of the British royal family. Yes, but they are also cultural symbols, media magnets, and, in many ways, rebels against a centuries-old system that demands conformity and discretion. Their first visit to Australia was met with a mixture of fascination, admiration, and controversy. The couple drew crowds, inspired admiration for their charitable work, and even sparked debates about the evolving role of royalty in the 21st century. Yet, every public smile, every handshake, every wave of the hand in the streets carried layers of meaning, unspoken messages, and political subtext that few could fully interpret at the time. Imagine standing in their shoes. You're met with adoration in some quarters, skepticism in others, and outright hostility somewhere else. The cameras never stop rolling, the press never lets up, and every gesture, every word, every decision is dissected and debated worldwide. And then, after the high of international admiration, you're told you cannot return. Not because of a scheduling conflict, not because of weather concerns, not because of logistical issues, but because the decision-makers, for reasons that remain partially hidden, decided the country isn't ready for you. How would you feel? Shocked? Angry? Embarrassed? Or maybe all three at once? That's precisely the emotional terrain Harry and Meghan now navigate, and it's one filled with frustration, calculation, and the quiet simmer of revenge, ambition, and reinvention. Australia's rejection is not a simple yes or no. It carries implications that ripple outward in multiple directions. Public opinion is divided. Some view the decision as justified, a reflection of independence from the monarchy's shadow. Others see it as unfair, even disrespectful, given the couple's past contributions and engagement with Australian causes. And for the media, of course, it's an irresistible story, one that sells itself in headlines, interviews, debates, and social media threads that stretch across continents. Memes circulated within hours. Editorials appeared almost instantly. Every social media post, every opinion piece, every pundit's take is a thread in a tapestry that Harry and Meghan are now forced to confront. But here's the thing. The rejection isn't just about Harry and Meghan's public image. It's about power, control, and narrative. It's about who decides what the royal family represents, who gets to be welcomed, and who gets denied. And for Harry and Meghan, who have spent years navigating both the expectations of royalty and the pitfalls of fame, this is another high-stakes chess match. Their every move, every public statement, every planned visit becomes a calculated maneuver in a world where missteps are amplified and victories are scrutinized. And while they've faced obstacles before, media scrutiny, family tension, global criticism, this moment is uniquely humiliating, not because they failed in public opinion, but because the rejection comes from a place that should have been familiar, even supportive. To fully grasp the gravity of this rejection, we have to go back to the roots of Harry and Meghan's relationship with Australia. Their first visit wasn't merely ceremonial, it was strategic. It was a chance to connect with fans, to champion charitable initiatives, and to subtly redefine their image beyond the traditional constraints of royalty. The couple's engagement with the public was immersive, thoughtful, and at times, bold. They attended events that highlighted social issues, spoke openly about causes close to their hearts, and, in doing so, won hearts across continents. There were moments that drew admiration. Harry's speech about veterans, Meghan's focus on women's empowerment, their shared public appearances that conveyed both warmth and charisma. And yet, behind the applause, there were undercurrents of tension, some subtle, some more pronounced. Media outlets speculated about protocol breaches, about perceived slights to local customs, and about the political implications of certain appearances. All of it was magnified because, for better or worse, Harry and Meghan are watched more closely than any other couple in the world. Which brings us back to the present moment. When the announcement came that Australia had rejected a second visit, reactions were immediate and polarizing. Headlines ranged from sympathetic to critical. Social media erupted with divided opinions, and commentary flowed in from celebrities, politicians, and ordinary citizens alike. Yet beneath the surface, there was an element of mystery. Official statements were carefully worded, avoiding blame or drama, while informal sources hinted at friction between advisors, public perception, and political calculations. The story was no longer just about two individuals seeking to return to a country they had once visited. It was about a collision of personalities, media narratives, and international relations. And for Harry and Meghan, the question looms. How do you respond when your intentions, no matter how carefully crafted, are publicly questioned and denied? This is where things get really interesting. Because Harry and Meghan are not the kind of people who quietly accept defeat. Their history tells us otherwise. Every setback they've faced has been met with a strategic response, whether through interviews, charitable work, public appearances, or social media. They understand the power of narrative, the importance of controlling the story, and the necessity of timing. And while Australia's rejection may appear as a setback on the surface, it also presents an opportunity to craft a second visit, to reignite public interest, and to assert their influence in a way that could shift perceptions entirely. But executing that plan requires careful calculation, insight into political dynamics, and an understanding of public sentiment that few can match. And here's the twist that makes this story even more compelling. What the public sees is only the surface. Behind the scenes, there are communications, negotiations, and strategic discussions that have never been made public. Advisors weigh risks and rewards. Celebrities weigh in. Political figures watch closely. And the couple themselves are navigating a minefield of expectation, perception, and personal desire. Every decision carries consequences, and every reaction is scrutinized. It's a high-stakes game, one where emotion and strategy collide in ways that are fascinating, complicated, and often contradictory. And for those of us watching from the outside, it's impossible not to be captivated by the drama, the suspense, and the human element of it all. So why does this story matter now more than ever? Because it's not just a story about a royal visit. It's about power, perception, and the intricate dance between personal agency and public expectation. It's about a couple who refuses to be defined solely by tradition, who challenges norms, and who navigates a world where every move is amplified and every misstep magnified. And it's about a country that made a choice that carries implications far beyond the immediate moment. The stakes are high, the emotions raw, and the potential fallout enormous. For Harry and Meghan, for the royal family, and for Australia, this is a moment that could redefine relationships, reputations, and roles for years to come. And just when you think you have a sense of what might happen next, the story twists again. Because Harry and Meghan are already planning their next move. The second visit is not a question of if, it's a question of how, when, and what they will do differently. There are strategies in place, advisors working behind the scenes, and a growing anticipation in both media and public circles. The tension is palpable. The stakes are higher than ever. And one misstep, or one unexpected revelation, could change everything. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The story of Harry and Meghan in Australia didn't begin with headlines, protests, or political controversies. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly, with the allure of a chance to connect with people halfway across the world. Australia has long held a special place in royal history. From Queen Elizabeth II's historic tours to Prince William and Kate's engagements, the island continent has always been more than a stop on the royal itinerary. It's a stage where tradition meets public fascination, where ceremonial pomp meets genuine connection. For Harry and Meghan, the first visit wasn't simply ceremonial. It was an opportunity to define themselves on their own terms, away from the relentless scrutiny of London. When the couple first touched down in Australia, there was a palpable sense of excitement. Crowds gathered at airports, streets lined with waving flags, and cameras flashed with every step. Yet, for Harry and Meghan, this visit was about more than appearances. It was about carefully curated engagements, charitable work, and creating a narrative that would resonate both locally and globally. Meghan, in particular, brought her characteristic focus and sensitivity to the visit, championing causes ranging from women's empowerment to social justice initiatives. Harry, ever the tactician, balanced his public persona with moments of intimacy and authenticity that made the public feel they were seeing more than just a prince. They were seeing a man, a husband, and a father in a unique spotlight. But not everything was seamless. Behind the smiles and applause, there were logistical hurdles, political undercurrents, and cultural sensitivities that required careful navigation. Australian officials, both governmental and ceremonial, had expectations. The media had agendas. Public opinion was a complicated mix of admiration, skepticism, and curiosity. Every handshake, every speech, every casual conversation was observed and dissected. Harry and Meghan, understanding the stakes, approached each interaction with a blend of strategy and sincerity. They were aware of the cameras, but they also wanted to reach people on a human level. This duality, performing for the world while genuinely engaging with the community, became a hallmark of their visit. One of the most talked about moments was Meghan's engagement with local women's organizations. She didn't simply attend events. She asked questions, listened, and drew attention to the issues these groups faced. Her approach wasn't about optics, it was about connection. People noticed. Social media buzzed. Articles highlighted her authenticity, and in some corners of the press, she was praised as a modernizing influence on royal engagements. Harry's work, meanwhile, focused on veterans and mental health initiatives. He engaged with service members, participated in community events, and used his platform to highlight causes that mattered to him personally. Together, they presented a dynamic that was simultaneously traditional and unconventional, a balancing act that many admired and some found threatening. Yet, even amidst the accolades and applause, there were subtle signs of tension. Protocols were questioned, minor breaches made headlines, and pundits speculated about the implications of their choices. Some commentators suggested that their approach, more candid, more engaged, less rigidly formal, challenged not only the expectations of royal behavior, but also the careful choreography that governments and royal offices often rely on. And while many Australians were charmed by the couple's approach, others expressed concern that the visit strayed from traditional norms. These undercurrents, while seemingly minor at the time, would later feed into the narrative surrounding the rejection of their second visit. Media coverage played a critical role in shaping public perception. Every outfit Meghan wore, every handshake Harry offered, every interaction with children or community leaders became fodder for discussion. International media outlets reported on their smiles, their gestures, and even the subtle body language between them. In many ways, the first visit was a masterclass in modern media diplomacy, balancing visibility with intimacy, performance with authenticity. But the spotlight was also relentless, and even small missteps could be magnified into controversies. Rumors about scheduling conflicts, overstepping boundaries, and subtle slights circulated quickly, illustrating how public perception could pivot on the smallest of details. One fascinating element of the first visit was how it illustrated the couple's ability to navigate complex social and political landscapes. They were guests in a foreign nation, yet they approached engagements with an understanding of local culture, history, and expectations. Meghan's speeches often referenced Australian history and contemporary issues, while Harry's work with veterans resonated deeply with a country that values military service. Their engagements were not random. They were deliberate, carefully planned to maximize impact and connection. This strategy revealed a nuanced understanding of soft power, influence achieved not through authority or title, but through presence, empathy, and careful storytelling. Yet, despite careful planning, challenges arose. Local media occasionally misinterpreted gestures, officials raised concerns about timing or content, and political figures weighed the implications of royal attention on domestic issues. Harry and Meghan had to respond not only to applause but to scrutiny, criticism, and, occasionally, skepticism. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required both emotional intelligence and strategic thinking. The tension between personal authenticity and public expectation would become a defining theme of their visits and, ultimately, a factor in the later rejection of their return. Beyond formal engagements, the visit also offered glimpses into the couple's personal dynamics. Observers noted the synergy between Harry and Meghan, mutual support, subtle reassurance, and visible affection that humanized them in the public eye. These moments were often contrasted against the rigid expectations of royal decorum, highlighting a tension between private emotion and public performance. The couple's ability to navigate this tension, maintaining professionalism while expressing genuine connection, earned them both admiration and scrutiny. Public fascination with this dynamic would become a recurring theme in subsequent coverage of their travels. Of course, no visit of this magnitude occurs in isolation. There were political considerations, logistical negotiations, and behind-the-scenes maneuvering that shaped every aspect of their time in Australia. Local officials had to coordinate security, manage crowds, and balance competing priorities, all while ensuring that the visit met ceremonial expectations. The royal household maintained a careful oversight role, providing guidance and advice while respecting the couple's autonomy. This delicate choreography, though largely invisible to the public, was critical in creating an appearance of seamless engagement. And yet, even with meticulous planning, friction points emerged, small disagreements, miscommunications, and differing priorities that foreshadowed the challenges of a second visit. One particularly revealing aspect of the first visit was the couple's media strategy. Unlike some traditional royals who rely primarily on formal statements or controlled appearances, Harry and Meghan engaged with media outlets in ways that blended personal narrative with public relations. Interviews were carefully timed, appearances were strategically chosen, and social media engagement was purposeful. Every move contributed to a narrative of modern, engaged, and relatable royalty. This approach, while effective in building public goodwill, also drew criticism from those who felt it challenged the traditional boundaries of royal conduct. It was a bold strategy, one that would influence the reception of any future visits. Another factor shaping the visit was the broader global context. At the time of their first trip, Australia was navigating its own social and political challenges, from domestic policy debates to evolving national identity issues. Harry and Meghan's presence, while not intended to influence politics, inevitably intersected with these dynamics. Their speeches, engagements, and public interactions were filtered through local cultural and political lenses, highlighting the complexity of international royal visits. For the couple, this meant not only performing their roles as public figures, but also navigating subtle cues from both officials and citizens. Their ability to do so effectively reinforced their reputation for strategic empathy, a quality that would become essential in planning a second visit. Yet, despite their careful efforts, not all reactions were positive. Certain segments of the media and public expressed skepticism, questioning whether their approach aligned with Australian norms or whether their visits were primarily self-promotional. These criticisms, though limited in scope, underscored a persistent challenge. Balancing public admiration with critical scrutiny. Harry and Meghan were acutely aware that every action would be interpreted, and that perception could shift quickly. The stakes were high, and the couple's responsiveness to these dynamics would later play a pivotal role in shaping plans for a second visit. In sum, the first visit to Australia was a complex tapestry of emotion, strategy, public engagement, and personal expression. It revealed the couple's strengths, their empathy, strategic thinking, and ability to connect with diverse audiences. It also exposed vulnerabilities, the potential for misinterpretation, the pressure of constant scrutiny, and the delicate interplay between personal desire and public expectation. These dynamics set the stage for what would come next. Because while the first visit had been largely successful in public terms, beneath the surface, tensions were brewing. Small missteps, subtle criticisms, and political sensitivities would converge to create an environment in which a second visit would not simply be a continuation, it would be a test. A test of public opinion, of institutional patience, and of Harry and Meghan's ability to navigate the complexities of international perception. And just when it seemed like everything was proceeding smoothly, the unexpected happened, a development that would send shockwaves through the palace, the couple, and Australia itself. What came next would change the trajectory of their plans entirely, and no one outside the inner circle saw it coming. Not everything that happens in the royal family makes it into the headlines. In fact, most of the decisions, tensions, and strategic discussions are hidden behind layers of protocol, advisors, and whispers in hallways that the public will never see. When news broke that Australia had rejected a second visit from Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the world saw the headlines, the social media storm, and the public reactions, but almost no one saw what happened behind the palace doors. And that's where the story becomes truly fascinating, dramatic, and, at times, downright shocking. The palace is not just a residence. It's a command center, a labyrinth of tradition, and a hive of strategic planning. Every public appearance, every statement, every visit abroad is the result of careful orchestration. Royal advisors, communications teams, private secretaries, and legal counsel work in constant coordination to manage both the optics and the logistics. In the case of Harry and Meghan, this machinery faced its most complicated test yet. The couple had stepped away from many traditional roles, charting their own course with a combination of media savvy and personal branding. Their independence created tension not because of defiance alone, but because it exposed cracks in a system that had long relied on predictability, loyalty, and hierarchy. Behind closed doors, advisors reportedly debated every angle of a potential second visit to Australia. Some argued that a return would reinforce the couple's soft power, showing goodwill, continuity, and engagement with international audiences. Others cautioned that past controversies, real or imagined, could undermine both the visit and the monarchy's image. These internal debates were not theoretical. They shaped real decisions that could affect international relations, public perception, and the delicate balance of authority within the royal household. One of the most sensitive issues revolved around control of the narrative. Harry and Meghan, having learned from past experiences, were determined to maintain a measure of autonomy over how their visit was portrayed. They understood the power of social media, the influence of carefully timed interviews, and the reach of global news outlets. But the palace, trained in centuries-old protocol, viewed control differently. They valued discretion, measured statements, and ceremonial consistency. When these two approaches collided, friction was inevitable. Reports from insiders suggest that there were heated conversations, tense negotiations, and moments of real frustration on both sides. The emotional stakes for Harry were especially high. Unlike previous visits conducted under the watchful eye of advisors, this trip represented a rare opportunity for him to step fully into his own identity. Free from some of the traditional constraints of royalty, he wanted to express his values, advocate for causes he cared about, and support Meghan in her own initiatives. But freedom comes at a cost, particularly when the world is watching and every word or gesture is subject to scrutiny. Advisors worried that even small deviations from protocol could generate controversy, while Harry and Meghan pushed for authenticity and impact. The tension between these objectives played out in a series of behind-the-scenes discussions, memos, and private meetings that the public would never see. Meghan's position was equally complex. As someone who had navigated both Hollywood and the British royal family, she understood the mechanics of public perception perhaps better than anyone in the palace. She knew how to craft a story, influence opinion, and generate support. But she also had to contend with the constraints of a system that often prioritized image over substance and tradition over innovation. Reports suggest that Meghan engaged in intense discussions with advisors about the timing, focus, and framing of the visit, advocating for causes she felt passionate about while also navigating palace sensitivities. These negotiations were delicate, requiring a combination of persuasion, diplomacy, and subtle assertiveness. It wasn't just strategy that drove tension behind the palace doors. There were personal dynamics, too. Harry's relationship with senior royals, particularly Prince William and Prince Charles, has always been layered with loyalty, rivalry, and unspoken expectations. Meghan's entrance into this environment added complexity. She was both a new ally and a disruptor, someone who challenged established norms and questioned long-standing assumptions. Behind the doors, private conversations likely included frank discussions about the implications of their visit, the optics of rejection, and the broader question of what it meant for the monarchy's image internationally. These discussions were sensitive, emotional, and, at times, explosive. One of the more intriguing behind-the-scenes elements involved communication strategy. Palace advisors debated how much information should be shared publicly, how to frame the visit, and how to manage potential backlash. Leaks, whether intentional or inadvertent, were a constant concern. Even the slightest misstep, a phrase in an official statement, a misinterpreted gesture, a casual remark, could spiral into global headlines. The balance between transparency and control, between authenticity and protocol, was a constant tightrope walk. And for Harry and Meghan, the stakes were personal as well as public. Every word, every decision, every meeting carried consequences for their reputations, their relationships, and their sense of agency. Financial considerations also played a role. The royal family is funded in part by public resources, and visits abroad often require careful budget planning and justification. Discussions behind the palace doors reportedly included not just logistics, but also funding, security, and media management. There was an awareness that a high-profile visit, especially one involving a couple as controversial and closely watched as Harry and Meghan, would attract scrutiny from media, government officials, and citizens alike. The rejection from Australia, therefore, was not just a public statement. It was a culmination of months of careful deliberation, negotiation, and risk assessment that few outside the inner circle could fully appreciate. The personal stakes for Harry and Meghan cannot be overstated. The palace is a world governed by tradition, hierarchy, and expectation, and stepping outside those boundaries comes at a cost. Reports from insiders suggest that the couple's desire for authenticity, autonomy, and engagement sometimes conflicted with the priorities of advisors and senior family members. These tensions created a complex environment in which even routine decisions, timing of appearances, choice of venues, or media engagement, required careful negotiation. Every move was scrutinized, every action measured, and every statement evaluated not only for immediate impact, but for long-term implications on their roles, relationships, and public perception. Even the emotional dimensions of these behind-the-scenes interactions were significant. Harry has always been candid about the pressures he feels, the scrutiny he faces, and the challenges of balancing duty with personal well-being. Meghan, similarly, has spoken about the intense spotlight, the invasive media coverage, and the personal toll of public life. Behind the palace doors, these realities intersected with strategic discussions, creating a potent mix of emotion, calculation, and pressure. It is within this environment that decisions about the second visit were being formed, debated, and ultimately challenged. And yet, despite the tension, there were moments of collaboration, strategy, and mutual support. Advisors worked to reconcile differing perspectives, mediate conflicts, and craft solutions that balanced protocol with the couple's desires. Harry and Meghan, aware of the stakes, engaged in negotiations that were reportedly intense but also thoughtful, reflecting a desire to navigate the complex environment without losing sight of their objectives. This behind-the-scenes balancing act was critical, setting the stage for the dramatic twists that would follow. But not all was smooth. Leaks, miscommunications, and subtle disagreements compounded the pressure. At times, senior advisors reportedly clashed over strategy, tone, and messaging, while Harry and Meghan pushed for autonomy and authenticity. The tension between control and freedom, tradition and modernity, was at the heart of these interactions. And it was this tension that ultimately shaped the context for Australia's rejection. A rejection that, on the surface, might have seemed abrupt or unexpected, but was in reality the product of months of deliberation, emotion, and negotiation behind closed doors. What made this even more dramatic was the personal dimension. Harry's frustration, Meghan's determination, and the advisor's cautious strategy created an environment charged with emotion and high stakes. Every discussion, every decision, every piece of advice was filtered through layers of loyalty, history, and expectation. And when Australia ultimately said no, the impact wasn't just public, it was deeply personal, echoing through the halls of the palace in ways that few outsiders could imagine. And just when it seemed that the story had reached its peak behind the palace doors, a surprising twist emerged. A development that would escalate tensions, alter plans, and set the stage for Harry and Meghan's next move in a way no one outside the inner circles anticipated. What happened next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The news hit like a lightning bolt. Australia, a country long seen as welcoming to the royal family, had rejected Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's request for a second visit. Instantly, the headlines blazed across newspapers, websites, and social media platforms worldwide. The public reaction was immediate, polarized, and intense. But to understand why this moment mattered so profoundly, we need to unpack what this rejection really meant, and what no one outside the highest levels of government and the royal household could see. At first glance, the announcement seemed almost mundane. A carefully worded statement citing scheduling conflicts and logistical challenges. But anyone who studies royal diplomacy knows that such statements are rarely neutral. Behind the carefully chosen words lay a network of political calculation, public sentiment, and institutional considerations that had been building for months. In effect, Australia wasn't simply declining a visit, they were sending a message. And for Harry and Meghan, that message was both jarring and deeply personal. Public reaction was, as expected, a mixture of outrage, disbelief, and curiosity. Supporters of the couple condemned the decision, framing it as an unnecessary slight against a family who had contributed so much to charitable causes and public engagement. Social media erupted with hashtags defending the Duke and Duchess, memes poking fun at the apparent slight, and heated debates about whether Australia was acting out of political caution or something more personal. On the other hand, critics argued that the couple had already had their moment, suggesting that Australia's rejection was a necessary assertion of independence and local priorities. The tension was immediate, raw, and emotional, exactly the kind of storm that Harry and Meghan had learned to navigate with both precision and creativity. What makes this rejection particularly fascinating is that it wasn't entirely public-facing. Behind the scenes, several factors contributed to the decision. Political advisors reportedly flagged concerns about potential media controversies, public perception, and diplomatic optics. There were also considerations about timing, budget, and security logistics, practical issues that could be amplified by the couple's global fame. But beyond logistics, the deeper currents of cultural sensitivity and historical context played a critical role. Australia, like many countries with colonial ties to the United Kingdom, has a complicated relationship with the monarchy. The visit of Harry and Meghan wasn't just ceremonial. It carried symbolic weight, a reminder of imperial history, modern relevance, and public sentiment. Insiders suggest that a tipping point may have come from subtle clashes between local officials and the royal couple's advisors. Reports hint at disagreements over scheduling, messaging, and media coverage that created friction behind the scenes. While the public only saw a single statement, the reality was a months-long negotiation that had stretched patience, tested relationships, and highlighted the challenges of balancing personal initiative with institutional expectations. In many ways, this rejection was less about the couple themselves and more about the complex interplay between tradition, modernity, and public perception. The timing of the rejection also amplified its impact. It came at a moment when Harry and Meghan were particularly visible in global media, following a series of high-profile interviews and appearances that had already drawn scrutiny and admiration in equal measure. In the world of celebrity diplomacy, timing is everything. To deny a visit at such a moment was to make a statement, both subtle and explicit. It said, "We recognize your influence, but we choose the parameters of engagement." For the couple, who had spent years carefully curating their image and expanding their influence. This was more than a logistical inconvenience. It was a direct challenge to their agency and authority. The media frenzy that followed only intensified the drama. International outlets dissected the announcement, analyzing language, tone, and implications. Opinion pieces explored whether the decision reflected political caution, public pressure, or cultural sensitivity. Social media debates ranged from analytical to downright heated, with users around the world taking sides. Fans of Harry and Meghan expressed incredulity, while critics cited previous controversies as justification. In every forum, the question lingered. Why, after a successful first visit, would Australia make this choice? There were also unexpected cultural dimensions to the story. Australia has a rich tradition of independent thought, civic pride, and sometimes irreverent humor when it comes to authority figures. For some citizens, the rejection of Harry and Meghan was seen as an assertion of autonomy, a declaration that the nation's priorities come first. For others, it was a disappointing rebuff, a missed opportunity for engagement with one of the world's most famous couples. The duality of public perception, simultaneously pride and disappointment, added complexity to the narrative, demonstrating that royal visits are rarely simple ceremonial exercises. Political implications extended beyond public opinion. Australia's government, aware of both local and international ramifications, had to weigh potential diplomatic fallout. Rejecting a royal visit is not a decision made lightly, and it requires balancing domestic priorities with international relationships. Some insiders suggest that there were extensive internal discussions weighing the benefits of engagement against the risks of media scrutiny and potential controversy. Security concerns, already heightened for high-profile figures like Harry and Meghan, added another layer of complexity. Every factor was considered carefully, and the decision ultimately reflected a confluence of practical, symbolic, and strategic considerations. For Harry and Meghan, the rejection was more than a public setback. It was a personal blow. Reports from insiders indicate that both were initially shocked, then frustrated, and eventually determined to find a path forward. The couple had invested emotional energy, careful planning, and strategic thought into the prospect of a second visit. To have it blocked, without clear explanation, was an affront not just to their plans, but to their personal sense of agency. In interviews following the announcement, their tone ranged from measured diplomacy to subtle indignation, signaling that they were already considering next steps. One of the most intriguing aspects of this moment is how it illustrates the intersection of emotion and strategy. Harry and Meghan are known for their ability to balance personal feelings with calculated public engagement. The rejection created a perfect storm, emotional reaction coupled with a global platform. How they chose to respond, or how they would respond in the future, would be scrutinized, debated, and analyzed endlessly. And this, in turn, set the stage for what would become a carefully orchestrated plan for a second visit, one designed to address both public perception and political hurdles. Adding to the tension was the unpredictability of global media. News of the rejection spread instantaneously, generating waves of commentary, speculation, and viral reactions. Every public statement, every interview snippet, every social media post was dissected in real time. For Harry and Meghan, navigating this landscape required careful attention to detail, strategic communication, and an acute understanding of how public sentiment shifts in a digital age. Any misstep could be amplified, creating controversy where none was intended. And yet, even amid this whirlwind, there was an element of anticipation. For supporters, the rejection created a sense of suspense. What would Harry and Meghan do next? Would they push back, appeal, or craft a new strategy entirely? For critics, the story offered fodder for debate. Was this a deserved consequence, or an overreaction by Australian authorities? The duality of expectation, hope and skepticism, anticipation and judgment, added an emotional weight to the situation that few other royal developments could match. Behind the headlines, insiders reportedly began to strategize. Advisors, friends, and confidants explored options ranging from private negotiations to high-profile public statements. The goal was clear: reclaim agency, manage public perception, and pave the way for a visit that would not only be accepted but celebrated. This delicate dance, balancing diplomacy, personal goals, and media savvy, would define the next chapter of Harry and Meghan's story in Australia. And just when it seemed that the rejection had closed the door entirely, a surprising opportunity emerged, one that no one had anticipated, and that would change the stakes for the couple entirely. A path forward, fraught with risk but rich with potential, was being quietly prepared behind the scenes. But what came next would shock the public, confound officials, and set Harry and Meghan on a course that would redefine not only their relationship with Australia, but their role in the global spotlight. When the news reached Harry and Meghan, the initial reaction was anything but calm. Imagine being told that a country where you had once been celebrated, where crowds cheered your every step, had now closed its doors to you. For anyone, that would sting. For Harry and Meghan, accustomed as they are to public attention but also keenly aware of perception, it was an electric jolt, a mixture of shock, frustration, and determination. Behind closed doors, reports suggest, the couple grappled with a flurry of emotions, disbelief, indignation, and the spark of resolve that would define their next moves. Harry, ever the protector and strategist, reportedly reacted with a mix of anger and concern. Publicly, he maintained a measured demeanor, but private accounts suggest that he was determined to understand exactly why this decision had been made. Advisors, staff, and confidants were pulled into discussions that explored every angle. Was this a political calculation? A public perception issue? A message from the palace indirectly influencing Australia? Every possibility was weighed, dissected, and debated. The frustration wasn't just about logistics. It was about control, autonomy, and respect. Meghan's reaction was equally layered. Known for her emotional intelligence and media savvy, she reportedly approached the rejection with a combination of disbelief and critical analysis. She wanted answers, but also sought to understand the larger narrative at play. Meghan's ability to frame setbacks as opportunities became immediately apparent. According to insiders, she began formulating ways to leverage the situation strategically, thinking not only about a potential second visit, but about the broader implications for public perception, media coverage, and global influence. Social media, of course, became a reflection of the couple's emotional landscape. While they were deliberating behind the scenes, fans expressed outrage on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Memes exploded within hours, blending humor, satire, and criticism of the rejection. Harry and Meghan, well aware of the global response, were reportedly monitoring these reactions closely. They understand that perception is power, and in this moment, perception was a weapon and a challenge rolled into one. Their public statements, sparse but pointed, were carefully crafted. Harry's tone, measured yet firm, suggested disappointment without aggression. Meghan's statements were empathetic, emphasizing connection, impact, and shared goals. Observers noted that every word was deliberate, designed to convey frustration without alienating supporters or creating unnecessary diplomatic friction. In this, they demonstrated a level of strategic poise that few expected, and that many commentators would later highlight as a hallmark of their approach to crisis management. The couple's emotional processing was not limited to the professional sphere. Behind the palace doors, friends and confidants report intense discussions about how the rejection felt personally. Harry, who has often spoken about the weight of media scrutiny and familial expectations, reportedly expressed both sorrow and resolve. Meghan, drawing on her own experiences navigating Hollywood and the British media, encouraged a measured response while also pressing for a plan of action. Together, they navigated a delicate balance, honoring their emotions while preparing for a strategic public response. One fascinating aspect of their reaction was the simultaneous engagement with both emotion and strategy. Harry and Meghan did not react impulsively. They allowed themselves to feel frustration, disappointment, and even anger. But they also began immediately thinking about the next steps. What could be salvaged? How could they reshape the narrative? What messages needed to be sent, subtly or overtly, to Australia, the public, and the media? This dual approach, feeling deeply while thinking strategically, would become a defining feature of how they managed the fallout from the rejection. The couple's reaction also included an internal assessment of their first visit. Reports suggest they revisited every detail, every engagement, every media interaction. What had gone well? What had been misinterpreted? Were there moments that could have inadvertently created tension with officials or the public? By analyzing the past with a critical eye, they were preparing to refine their strategy for any potential second visit. This level of reflection demonstrates their understanding that public perception is rarely static. It evolves, shifts, and responds to subtle cues. At the same time, emotion played a role in shaping their response. Harry reportedly experienced a mixture of personal disappointment and concern about what the rejection signaled regarding their broader role in the monarchy and public life. Meghan, known for her resilience and clarity of purpose, reportedly used the moment as a catalyst, encouraging them to see opportunity amid setback. This interplay of emotion and strategy is what allows the couple to navigate high-pressure situations that would destabilize others. They process frustration, then channel it into action. Direct engagement with the media became another critical aspect of their reaction. While the palace remained largely silent, Harry and Meghan understood that shaping public perception required both restraint and initiative. They began consulting with advisors on interviews, social media statements, and controlled appearances. The objective was not to publicly confront Australia, but to assert agency, maintain visibility, and subtly frame the narrative on their terms. Every word, tone, and gesture was calibrated to convey both professionalism and authenticity, a delicate balance few have mastered as they have. Interestingly, their response was not only strategic but also emotionally resonant. They acknowledged disappointment, validated the feelings of supporters, and emphasized their ongoing commitment to causes and communities they value. This emotional intelligence allowed them to maintain credibility, reinforce public goodwill, and demonstrate resilience in the face of rejection. Observers have noted that this combination of emotion and strategic communication is rare among public figures, particularly those operating at the intersection of fame, politics, and tradition. Another layer of their reaction involved internal alignment. Harry and Meghan reportedly spent significant time discussing their joint goals, public image, and personal values. This alignment was critical. Both needed to present a unified front to maximize impact and maintain credibility. Their shared vision allowed them to navigate the rejection without fracturing under pressure, reinforcing the perception of partnership, mutual respect, and shared purpose. Yet the emotional weight of rejection was inescapable. Despite their strategic poise, the couple reportedly experienced moments of frustration, self-reflection, and even quiet anger. They were acutely aware that public perception, media narratives, and political calculations intersected in ways that could easily overshadow their intentions. This awareness fueled both caution and determination. Caution to avoid missteps that could exacerbate the situation. Determination to craft a path forward that would assert their agency and control the narrative. The response also extended to private communication with friends, confidants, and advisors. Harry and Meghan reached out to trusted allies to process the emotional impact, explore potential strategies, and seek guidance. These conversations reportedly included frank discussions about risk, public perception, and the long-term implications of the rejection. Through this network of support, the couple balanced emotional processing with strategic foresight, laying the groundwork for their next moves. Finally, their reactions set the stage for a bold and carefully orchestrated plan. While the rejection could have been a full stop, for Harry and Meghan it became a pivot point. They began envisioning a second visit. Not as a repetition of the first, but as an evolution, more impactful, more strategically calculated, and designed to maximize public support while mitigating potential conflicts. Every element of this plan would reflect lessons learned from the rejection, insights gained from the first visit, and a keen awareness of the emotional, political, and media landscapes they now navigated. And just when it seemed that the couple's next moves were a private calculation, whispers of their intentions began to leak, creating anticipation, speculation, and intrigue. The world would soon see that Harry and Meghan were not passive recipients of rejection. They were actors, strategists, and emotional architects of their next chapter. But what came next would shock both officials and the public. and it would set in motion a sequence of events that no one saw coming. If there is one thing Harry and Meghan have proven repeatedly, it is that they do not sit idle when faced with rejection. For them, every obstacle is an opportunity, every setback a lesson, and every public slight a chance to recalibrate, strategize, and come back stronger. The rejection from Australia was no different. Behind closed doors, the couple immediately shifted from processing the disappointment to crafting a plan. A comeback that would assert their agency, amplify their message, and ultimately reclaim control over a narrative that had been temporarily stolen from them. The planning phase began with reflection. Harry and Meghan reportedly spent hours reviewing the events of their first visit. What went well, what was misinterpreted, and what might have contributed, consciously or unconsciously, to the rejection. Every handshake, speech, public engagement, and media interaction was analyzed in painstaking detail. Did their approach to the media inadvertently create tension? Did certain engagements send the wrong signals to officials? Were public perceptions fully considered? This exhaustive analysis was not born of ego, but of necessity. In the world they occupy, perception is power, and understanding the mechanics of influence is essential to achieving any goal. From there, the couple began formulating a multi-layered strategy. This was not just about returning to Australia. It was about orchestrating a visit that would be nearly impossible to reject, one that balanced diplomacy, public engagement, and personal impact. Reports suggest that they consulted widely with advisors, friends, and strategic communications experts, seeking input on everything from timing and messaging to security and media engagement. Every detail mattered. Even the smallest misstep could be amplified globally, turning a carefully crafted visit into controversy. Central to their strategy was the recognition that perception must be managed both domestically and internationally. Australia's rejection was a public signal, but it also reflected broader concerns, protocol, optics, and potential public reaction. Harry and Meghan understood that a successful second visit would require addressing these concerns without sacrificing authenticity. This meant crafting a narrative that emphasized goodwill, service, and engagement, while subtly reinforcing their independence and agency. In essence, the comeback was about demonstrating that the couple could navigate complex international, political, and social landscapes with finesse, resilience, and impact. The emotional dimension of the planning was equally significant. The rejection had stung, but rather than allowing frustration to dominate, Harry and Meghan channeled their feelings into determination. Insider accounts describe long nights of discussion, brainstorming sessions, and scenario planning, during which the couple balanced their personal emotions with strategic foresight. They asked themselves tough questions. How do we turn this rejection into an opportunity? How do we engage the public in a way that resonates? How do we ensure that every interaction supports both our personal goals and the broader narrative we wish to convey? These questions were not theoretical, they were operational. Every answer informed real-world decisions that would shape the second visit. Timing, as always, was critical. Harry and Meghan knew that any future visit would need to be meticulously scheduled to avoid conflicts, maximize visibility, and ensure public enthusiasm. They also understood that global media attention could be harnessed strategically. By carefully choosing dates, venues, and appearances, they could create anticipation, generate positive coverage, and frame the narrative on their terms. Every element of timing, from arrivals to press briefings to public engagements, was calculated to ensure maximum impact. Another crucial aspect of their planning involved understanding public sentiment. The couple reportedly analyzed social media trends, public opinion polls, and media coverage from their first visit and the rejection period. They sought to identify areas of support, potential flashpoints, and opportunities to build goodwill. This research allowed them to craft messages and appearances that would resonate emotionally, politically, and culturally. By aligning strategy with sentiment, Harry and Meghan aimed to minimize resistance and maximize the potential for success. Security and logistics were also key components. A second visit would require careful coordination with Australian authorities, private security teams, and palace advisors. Reports suggest that the couple began early consultations to anticipate challenges, negotiate terms, and ensure that every aspect of the visit could proceed smoothly. In the world of high-profile public figures, small oversights can have disproportionate consequences. Harry and Meghan's planning reflected a recognition of these stakes, demonstrating both pragmatism and strategic foresight. Media strategy, as ever, was central to their comeback plan. Unlike traditional royals who rely primarily on formal statements, Harry and Meghan understood the power of narrative in a digital age. They sought to control the story, shape perceptions, and engage directly with audiences. Plans reportedly included carefully timed interviews, social media engagement, and selective media appearances designed to highlight their objectives while mitigating potential controversies. This strategy reflected lessons learned from past experiences. Proactive narrative management is far more effective than reactive response. A fascinating element of the planning involved balancing personal values with public expectations. Harry and Meghan are known for prioritizing causes and initiatives that align with their beliefs. The second visit, they decided, would not merely be ceremonial. It would be meaningful. By highlighting charitable work, social initiatives, and community engagement, they aimed to create a visit that resonated on multiple levels: emotional, political, and cultural. In doing so, they would demonstrate that their value extends beyond celebrity status, reinforcing legitimacy in both public and institutional eyes. Collaboration and alignment between Harry and Meghan were also critical. Planning a visit of this scale required shared vision, mutual trust, and complementary skills. Harry brought experience in diplomacy, ceremonial engagement, and military-related initiatives, while Meghan brought media acumen, emotional intelligence, and advocacy expertise. Together, they created a synergy that allowed them to anticipate challenges, innovate strategies, and execute plans with precision. The alignment of personal values, emotional intelligence, and strategic thinking became the foundation of their comeback. Behind the scenes, advisors reportedly worked to craft multiple contingency plans. What if public opinion shifted? What if officials raised objections? What if logistical challenges arose at the last minute? By preparing for a range of scenarios, Harry and Meghan ensured that the second visit would not be derailed by unforeseen circumstances. This level of foresight underscores the seriousness with which they approached the challenge, reflecting both pragmatism and an acute awareness of the stakes. The couple's planning phase also included subtle signals to the public and media. Without overtly announcing their intentions, small hints, appearances, and engagements began to suggest that a comeback was imminent. These signals created anticipation, speculation, and intrigue, keeping the public engaged and the media guessing. By generating suspense without revealing full details, Harry and Meghan leveraged curiosity as a strategic tool, a technique that has consistently amplified the impact of their public presence. And yet, despite careful planning, uncertainty remained. Australia's initial rejection was not a simple bureaucratic hiccup. It was a complex decision influenced by politics, public sentiment, and historical considerations. Convincing officials, managing public perception, and executing a visit without controversy required not just strategy, but finesse, patience, and creativity. The challenge was enormous, the stakes global, and the potential rewards profound. As the couple refined their plans, an unexpected development emerged. A subtle opening from Australian officials suggesting that a second visit might not be entirely impossible. This small, behind-the-scenes signal created both hope and urgency. It indicated that the door was not fully closed, but that careful negotiation, strategic planning, and flawless execution would be required to secure the desired outcome. For Harry and Meghan, this was both a challenge and an opportunity. The chance to turn rejection into triumph, to assert agency, and to demonstrate resilience on a global stage. But just as the comeback began to take shape, new complications arose, unexpected, delicate, and potentially game-changing. What happened next would test every aspect of their planning, strategy, and emotional resolve, and it would set the stage for a sequence of events that no one outside their inner circle could have predicted. When news of Australia's rejection of Harry and Meghan's second visit broke, the reaction was immediate, relentless, and global. Within hours, headlines dominated international media outlets. Television broadcasts dissected the decision. Newspapers ran editorials analyzing political, cultural, and personal implications. Social media platforms exploded with hashtags, commentary, memes, and debates. The story wasn't just news. It became a worldwide spectacle, an intricate dance between fact, interpretation, and speculation. And at the center of it all were Harry and Meghan, their reputations, their plans, and their next moves. The media coverage was intense, often contradictory, and highly sensationalized. One outlet might frame the rejection as a political necessity, emphasizing Australia's autonomy and cautious diplomacy. Another might portray it as a personal slight, suggesting that the couple had been unfairly snubbed despite their prior contributions and public engagement. Commentary ranged from sympathetic to critical, with pundits debating whether the couple's approach to their first visit had inadvertently caused the setback, or whether the decision was motivated purely by political considerations. This conflicting coverage only heightened public curiosity and intensified scrutiny on every subsequent move by the couple. Social media amplified the frenzy in unprecedented ways. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok became virtual battlegrounds. Supporters flooded timelines with defense campaigns, creative memes, and calls to action, portraying Harry and Meghan as resilient figures facing unfair obstacles.